Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Recovery Reimagined Circle Talk with Dr. Wes Robbins. My name is Patrick. I'll be your host today. Great to see so many of you showing up, and thank you for joining us. Our guest today, as I said, is Dr. Weston Robins, a psychologist, author, radical youth worker, and someone with lived experience of addiction. Um, But it's how he came to understand that period of his life, of his addiction, that I find so interesting. I found where he said, I no longer saw addiction as inherently negative, but as a powerful energy that always flowed through me. I just didn't know how to wield it. I had no idea how to channel it. So Wes holds a PhD in consciousness and society from the University of West Georgia, a program spanning humanistic, transpersonal, and critical psychologies, and his doctoral dissertation on his own experience of addiction became the book he wrote called The Hand of Addiction, published by Routledge in 2024. It's a remarkable piece of work that draws on the ideas of Gregory Bateson to map addiction across 5 dimensions and asks what changes when we finally stop treating people as broken and start treating them as whole. So, with that, Wes, it's great to see you. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I've been watching many of your conversations, and in fact, you just put one on your YouTube channel with you and Nora Bateson. And that's how I came to find out about your work. Was I was listening to Jeffrey Mishlove talking about Nora Bateson, on his great podcast, the original podcaster, Jeffrey Mishlove. And anyway, he mentioned Nora Bateson. I'm checking her out. I came across Gregory Bateson, and then I came across that you'd written this book influenced by his work. And then I started listening to you, and I thought, wow, we have to have a conversation. But first of all, let's start. You're in Georgia, right? I believe you grew up in Georgia. Is that right?
Yes, and Patrick, I'll just say I want to say thank you first and foremost. This is an amazing opportunity. I'm grateful to be on Recovery Reimagined, and you and Matea have been so cordial and inviting in all of our emails. And so I'm just excited to be here. But yes, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, more specifically Alpharetta, Georgia. I live in Woodstock and then Alpharetta, but it's probably like 30, 40 minutes outside of Atlanta.
Okay. I love the sound of that place, Alpharetta.
Yep.
It just got a great alliteration to it. But your family growing up, I know you've talked about your family growing up, this incredible lineage of women in your family growing up and their experience in the healing, working in the field. I wonder if you could tell us about that, how far it goes back and how it ended up with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I feel very fortunate. I think about Dr. Cornell West talks a lot about lineage and how important it is and how we stand on the shoulders of giants. And so for me, my mom is my biggest role model. Her name is Ginger Robbins, and she has her master's in behavioral analysis from Drake University, and for years did immersive social work. So she ran an advocacy center that worked with abused, neglected children. It was a one-stop shop for healing for any child that had been through abuse or neglect, and they worked alongside Department of Family and Children Services, Crimes Against Children, but she just did profound community work and healing work. And then her mom, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, Harriet McGee, has her EDD from Vanderbilt University and was the she was actually the dean of the College of Sciences at Charleston Southern University for years. And so I always like to say I had this, whether I wanted it or not, psychology, human behavior, um, the socio-cultural examination of what it means to be human was kind of there since I was young. And I actually, in my office, I have an old photograph that goes even farther back and has my great grandmother, my no, my great great grandmother, great great grandfather, all from Naples, Italy, and their six sons and one daughter. And I think their daughter Blanche was a social worker of sorts before it was even a formalized thing. So helping has been in my blood. Community, helping, socialization, psychology, it's always been there.
Wow. And it goes back even further. Didn't it go back to your great grandmother too? I think I heard you mention somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was interested in listening to that when you were talking to Nora Bateson about what did you talk about craft or you know how crafts are in the past in older times where you know the family members learned the craft from their parents and carried it on,
Yeah,
you
she
know.
she spoke to it, she's such a poet with her verbiage and lexicon, but she said an intergenerational artisanal craft. And she wasn't
That's
even
right.
speaking about it as working with your hands. It was working with thoughts and
Mm,
ideas and concepts. And so, you know, Bateson's work has proliferated my understanding in so many ways. But when I look at her family lineage, William Bateson was Gregory Bateson's father, and William Bateson actually coined the term genetics and
wow.
did some profound work in the scientific community. And then, of course, Gregory Bateson's work with cybernetics, with systems thinkings. And Nora
Mm,
Bateson has now carried that torch, but also added a wealth of dimension and dynamic to it with her work in warm data, systems thinking. She has two terms that I really love called semathesy, which means collective learning, learning, mutual learning, learning together. And then another term called aphanipoesis, which is the opposite of insidious. So something that is insidious is kind of has this coalescence and this growth throughout time towards the negative. Something that is a phani poesis is this coalescence and growth slowly building towards beauty and strength and the positive. And so, but yeah.
wow, that's beautiful. And of course a lot of that growth of course happens in community
Mm,
and you know, um, we can get on to talking about that. But now you came to this work really through your own lived experience of addiction. Is that right? You have spent 7 years in the throes of addiction and
yeah.
finally found recovery. Would you tell us about a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I had an amazing childhood, and I had both my mom and my dad and my little sister were there, they were present, they were engaged, but I was always kind of a rebel rouser, very different on the fringes. I like to call myself a sensation seeker, a risk taker. And but I also that was coupled with a lot of insecurity and a lot of anxiety. And so growing up, I was a bit of a late bloomer with my substance use and experimentation. So I didn't smoke cannabis until I was about 17. And then when I did, I slowly kind of started to progress in my use. And I fell in love with weed. I don't think, and I will say this, I don't think that marijuana is inherently evil. I don't think it's the devil's lettuce, nor do I think it's the healing of the nation. I think it's a plant and it shifts consciousness, and some people can form a healthy relationship. I myself formed a pretty codependent, daily, abusive, enmeshed relationship with it. And at the time, I was working at different CD stores back when those were around before MP3 and iTunes and record shops. But many of my friends, when I was 17, 18, 19, were in their early 20s, probably 22, 23, and they were experimenting a lot with cocaine and methamphetamine. And so before I knew it, I was kind of engulfed in this community that was using those substances substances that I never thought that I would use, but I became more curious about. And then it kind of swept me up like a tornado. So before I knew it,
Mm.
from the ages of 17 to 23, I had 3 arrests, went through a ton of emotional turmoil, running from myself, running from pain. And it was a lot of existential nihilism, so to speak, of not knowing my place in the world, seeing a lot of discontent and not knowing what to do with that energy. And so I gravitated more towards that substance use as a way to try and escape some of the emotions that I was feeling and didn't know how to process. And then at about 24 years of age, I was exhausted. I had lost several friends to overdoses. I felt like my soul and my spirit had been dampened in so many ways. I was starting to recognize that energy was a boomerang, and any energy that I put outward was slowly but surely returning to me. And so this energy of lying, cheating, stealing, treating others poorly was starting to come back to me. And I wanted to move in a different direction. So I remember it was December 2005. I'm about 24 years old. I'd been arrested 3 times. I had luckily moved away from my hardcore use. I had stopped doing cocaine, methamphetamine, called all the people that I loved and cared about that were in that circle and said, I can't be a part of this anymore. But I still had a pretty abusive relationship with cannabis. And I was watching a Red Hot Chili Peppers DVD. I don't know if anybody knows that band, the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Mhm.
Um, but they'd written a lot of books, especially the lead singer Anthony Kiedis had written a book called Scar Tissue and talked about a lot of the drug addiction in the band, cocaine, heroin. Um, and I was watching that DVD, and my little sister Hannah had been a big part of my life. That was our favorite mutual band. And during those years of active addiction, I she was 6 years younger than me. So while I'm 17, she's 13, 14, 15, and it put her through quite a bit. And I remember watching that DVD and thinking, where could I be right now at 24 if I had made some different decisions at 18, 19? And where would my life be if I wasn't pouring all of my energy into substances and I was pouring it more into myself and to people? And so I decided to walk away from my substance use and cannabis completely and started to walk towards growth and healing. And I found a lot of respite. I would go hike a place here called Kennesaw Mountain. And my goal for the day is I'd take a book bag, I'd load it up with a bunch of waters, a couple, protein bars, and my music and a journal. And I would go hike for 4, 5, 6 hours at a time by myself in nature. And sometimes, Patrick, I'd cry my eyes out as I'm journaling and writing about my life. Other times, I'd have these moments of profound joy. But it was almost like if I could be alone and I could be in nature, I could start to heal some of those inner wounds that I hadn't looked at and I'd avoided for the last 7 years of my life. And then it started to progress and move in a way of Afani Poesis, instead of this insidious, addictive growth that had taken over my life. I started to channel it in a different way. And that's when helping people kind of became a part of my mission. So I went and finished my bachelor's, uh, went on to get a master's in counseling, become a licensed professional counselor. And the whole time I was like, I don't know if I even believe in therapy. I don't even know if I'm going to be a good therapist. I don't know if this is going to help anybody. But the haunting question that I had was, I think if I can meet any young person going through what I've been through, that I can help sit with them in that fire and figure out ways to walk through it, and to care about themselves and to reconnect with themselves. And so, yeah, that was a big part of my journey.
Well, so you kind of dove right in a way into the the inner journey, going off on your own into the wilderness. It's kind of like a vision quest or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean
Absolutely.
that I love that story. And hey, I'm so glad Anthony Kiedis and Flea are still around.
Oh man.
They didn't join the 27 Club.
No, and Flea just did the best jazz album ever.
I know,
It
amazing.
Honora. It's so
Yeah,
incredible, and it's just
yeah,
so cool to see him express his truest self. Yeah, beautiful.
yeah. I listened to him talking about it, and you know, he blew my mind. Yeah, I mean, we just look at all the people we lost. Glad you're still around, man.
Me too, man. Honored to be here. And
Yeah.
I tell a lot of the young people I work with who have a lot of intense suicidality, um, that I went through it too. I mean, I remember 18 through 20, I wasn't making suicide attempts, but I was not avoiding it. I was taking such high risks that I was welcoming my death. I was basically like, look, if it happens, great, because I'm not loving being alive. And
Mm,
now I sit here at 44 years old. I got two beautiful daughters. My daughter Story is 13, River's 10. I've been married for the last 16 years to the most amazing woman. And I'm just so grateful that I'm here. So I'm with you,
yeah,
brother. I'm glad to
yeah.
be here too.
No, I see the fentanyl on the street, okay, here in San Francisco, where I am at the moment, and I was having a conversation with somebody who's not an addict, doesn't understand, just addiction's not part of their DNA. And he was saying, I don't know why they would do it if they know with all the publicity that that one little tab could kill them. And I said, maybe that's the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe that's the point, because I've been there. And I'm glad I'm not on the street today. I'll tell you that. It's just so dangerous. But probably because you're able to talk about the Red Hot Chili Peppers and music, you're able to relate to the young people that you work to a bit better, huh? You can reach
Yeah.
them
I mean,
there.
music's been something that has saved my life many times over. And I feel like music and art, those are the vanguards of our species, the artists, the musicians, the creative expressors. I mean, I know at a point in my life, I couldn't find meaning and purpose anywhere, but if an artist released something new that
Mm,
was beautiful and resonated with me, it
mm,
was like, okay. And so, like, artists like Peter Gabriel, Bjork, Kate Bush, um, just a plethora. Wes Montgomery, like
mm,
Ben Harper is my favorite artist in the entire world, and I got to meet him when I was younger. But it was like they were a beacon of light. It was
yeah.
like there was something to be. They were saying something in their work and expressing it, and so with working with young people, I always love to connect through music and art in any way I can. And I'm honest with them too. If they play me some stuff I don't like, I'm like, this is horrible. This is trash. I hate this. I'm not trying to like be fake, but
Yeah.
then we'll have these beautiful discussions about why they like it. Like I've never been into metal, but I've had a lot of clients that are big into metal and they're like, listen to this, listen to that. And I'm like, dude, this scares me. This is like making my ears bleed. But then I'll sit with them and they'll be like, "But listen to this," and I'll be able to see it through their eyes and fall in love with it in a certain way where it's like they take me into their world. And so and then the other thing I'll say, Patrick, is like, I don't know who I'd be without my clients and without the young people and the families that I've worked with over the years. Like I'm deeply grateful for the healing energy that they've brought me, and they've taught me patience and resilience and beauty and strength. And so I don't see it as this I'm some doctor expert on the human psyche and they're down here and I'm analyzing and pathologizing and trying to fix them. I see it as a mutual learning, as a sympathecy, as Carl Rogers talked about, a joining. I'm just another human being on the path, and if I can hold sacred space and mirror for them ways to care for yourself, then beautiful. But we're learning from each other, and I'm grateful for the gifts that they give me.
That's just beautiful because I know that one of the things that you really got into is what's called radical youth work. Okay.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what makes it radical? What's radical youth work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I owe a huge deal to two people. So Dr. Hans Scott Meyer and his wife, Dr. Kathy Scott Meyer. And they are the first ones who introduced me to that theoretical concept, radical youth work. And Kathy Scott Meyer was the head of my dissertation committee. She's at the University of West Georgia. She's the head of the College of Arts and Sciences department. And then her husband, Dr. Hans Scott Meyer, is at Kennesaw State University and teaches in child and youth work. And so I was instinctually doing radical youth work before I even knew it was a thing. And it was very person centered for me. So I got to work for years for an organization called Vive, that's now called Team Wonder. And this was working with young people that were coming back from wilderness programs, therapeutic boarding schools, residential treatment centers, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, self harm, suicidality, but we were connecting. So I would go out into community and meet with young people. And Patrick, we do everything: mountain biking, hiking, rock climbing. I went skydiving with a client. We went out to eat more times than I can count. It was anything to be able to build relationship and true connection. And my role was a therapeutic mentor. And that was kind of the work I had been doing. And then when I began the PhD program in 2014, and it was at West Georgia, and it's unique, and we're exploring humanistic and critical and transpersonal, I come across Kathy and Hans, and they start to talk to me about radical youth work, this methodology that they've written on for 25 plus years. And it talks about mutual liberation. So the idea that this is youth worker and youth joining forces to connect and grow and work together in collaboration, and for a common political purpose. So, kind of this deeper recognition that just because we may be different ages developmentally, we are still human and we are still experiencing the confines and oppressive nature of what it means to live in a geopolitical system that oftentimes tries to get us to behave and to not rebel and to not be our authentic selves. And so, how do we fight some of those political systems that want to stifle our truest artistic expression of self? And so it was through things, very experiential things: music, art, expressive poetry, dance. All of that was radical youth work. And but those two kind of components of mutual liberation and a common political purpose were kind of at the core of what radical youth work really means. Because most youth work that you see is, again, you see a hierarchy form where it's the teacher or the psychologist or the advanced older adult, not necessarily working with the youth, but more giving a prescriptive dictating to the youth what they need to do with their life and what health is and what is going to be good for them, instead of joining with them and really trying to understand that interpersonal world and where they're at and how they see the world and what they believe and what moves them emotionally. And so all of my radical youth work was organic to begin with. And then I started to learn more about the theory and read more. And that's what brought me to opening the center that I ran called Eternal Strength, which I opened in 2020 and just closed it last September 2025. And it was beautiful. We ran for 5.5 years. We opened up a nonprofit called Cosmic Lamb that I have tattooed on my head. And people joke all the time and say I should get a little QR code right beside it so they could just scan it and donate. But the thing I'm the most proud of is what we did to the mental health system. And the mental health system, at least here in the United States, has become basically taken over by big business, large conglomerates, organizations that do not have clinicians at the head, but more business people who are focused on return of investment and profit margins and scaling. And so we see all of the psychiatric facilities and stabilization, over medicating, over pathologizing. And then we see residential treatment centers and therapeutic residential spaces, but also some of the outpatient programs like PHPs or partial hospitalizations, IOPs, intensive outpatients. They've become very cookie cutter. And especially with youth with work, it's like I was watching, that's what made me build the centers. I was watching countless youth come into my office and families that would say, look, we spent over $250,000 on therapeutic support care for our kid, and now they're back home. They've been through all of the programming and they're still struggling. And so it drove me to build this center, to create community, and to do radical youth work. And it was beautiful and amazing. Um, I blew a gasket towards the end. I was so spread thin psychologically, financially, spiritually, that it was another huge lesson for me, to kind of come back and start caring for myself. But I'm forever grateful for the work that we did, and it was radical youth work to the core. We didn't sell out at the end. It never became something that was co-opted or taken over. It stayed true to its heart. And if you ask any kid or family that ever came through there, they'd be like, yo, eternal strength is my jam. Everybody there was amazing. They love me. They're real. They're honest. And so I wear it as a badge of honor, and I still rock. I got my sweatshirt says Eternal Strength Center for Radical Youth Work.
Right on, Wes. Where do I get one of those T-shirts?
I'll get you one.
All
Absolutely.
right. You
Yeah,
could do
yeah.
the QR code with a henna tattoo. That way you can change it every now and
There you
again.
go. Yes,
Yeah.
perfect.
But just listening to you, and I understand, I heard you talk about, I mean, that's a lot to take on. And I think, what, 5, 7 years? And yeah, burnout, man. It's just because you had a lot of employees. There was a lot going on in the end. You know what it reminded me of? You're familiar with Bruce Alexander's Rat Park? Yeah,
Yeah, his book, The Globalization of
yeah,
Addiction,
it's
one of the
phenomenal.
best books ever written. And yes, Rat Park, 100%.
You created a Rat Park.
100%. And it was beautiful to watch, and we were Wild West, and we learned a lot. But you're right, it was non-hierarchical. I mean, of course, it had to have staff and different
Yeah.
roles, but man, I kept it organic, Patrick. I was probably a little too organic. And that was something that, like, towards the end, it was costing upwards of like 60 to 80 grand a month to keep the
Yeah.
doors open.
Yeah.
So we started to try and become an IOP and to work with insurance. And I thought maybe there's a way to do this with some integrity, but it was just proving to kind of slowly become what it was never meant to be. And I think it's hard to run large, organic, mutually kind of balanced communities like that. But yeah, I love that you
Yeah.
bring up Rat Park, because
Yeah.
it's we heal in community. Um, it's sad that we don't have a lot of spaces for youth and young adults other than therapeutic treatment centers for them to go talk about depression, anxiety, self-harm, challenges of life. It's like we've kind of compartmentalized where they can go and do that, when in actuality it needs to be available everywhere. I feel like at the YMCA, at the gym, at extracurricular places, especially in schools, we need to be having talks about emotional wellness and well-being and holistic care, and giving young people places to process.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. A lot of this, even what, have you heard the term of benign anarchy?
Mm-mm. But I can.
It actually comes from a Russian prince who influenced Bill Wilson in the founding of
Okay.
AA. Yeah, he was like the original. He was from back in the 1800s. I think he wrote a book in 19 early 1900s called Mutual Aid. The term
Yes.
mutual.
You
Yeah.
know what? I got it.
Oh, you
It's
got
sit
it. Yeah.
it's sitting
Kapenick.
right
What's
over
his
here.
name? What's his name?
Peter,
Peter
hold on.
Kapenick or something. Yeah.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah. yeah, anarchist. He was an anarchist, but and that's the one. Yeah, yeah. Well, that influenced Bill Wilson a lot when he wrote the
Awesome.
12 traditions, you know, like
Yeah.
our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern, and each group
Yeah.
being autonomous. And in it, Bill Wilson talks about his influence by reading that book. And somewhere in the book, AA Comes of Age, I think it is, he calls AA a benign anarchy.
Mm.
But you know what happens? Everything one of the things that happened with AA is the court system mandating people to be there. Well, good luck with that. I mean, obviously it helps, right? So I can't say it doesn't help. Certain people do stay, but I think that when you're mandated to do anything, well, even, anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, but so now maybe you could tell us about this thinking of Gregory Bateson, The Hand of Addiction, the book you wrote, and it's not the fingers, it's the relationship, it's the space in between, right?
Yes. Yeah. That was so when I was first introduced to Gregory Bateson was his work Ecology of Mind. And I was in a course with Dr. Hans Scott Meyer, and he started to work with us on these concepts. And when I heard Bateson talk about the human hand, and he said, yeah, if you look at the hand, we typically begin to think it's these five independent, separate, compartmentalized fingers. But if you really look at the functionality of the system, it's all intertwined in a web and a tapestry of interconnectedness, and how they relate to one another becomes very important. So it's the four spaces in between, and that's why I called it the spaces in between. And what I started to do, Patrick, is if you went to any bookstore or you went and you researched addiction, what you would see is different theorists, psychologists, and academics would pick one of these five arenas to look at addiction through, almost like a lens, and they would prioritize it over the others. So I went and looked at the thumb, which I called the biomedical, or the biological, this idea that we have a DNA and we have a neurology and a brain chemistry, and so much of addiction will look at the brain and the areas of the brain that the dopaminergic system, accumbens, how this relates to our reward pathways and addiction and how it shows up in our brain chemistry. So the biological, you could get a lot of people that were like, that's it. We know what addiction is. It's a brain disease and it's biological and it operates in this way. Then you move to the index finger, which I called the psychological. And this is where you would get theorists like Dr. Gabor Mate, who has done beautiful work, and I love all of his work, but he would say, wait a minute, it's the psychological. It has a lot to do with the story we tell ourselves about ourselves, our narrative of self, our personal lived experience, our personal history, whether we've had childhood trauma, what we've been through, how we've housed that. Addiction becomes this psychological component that runs deep. And then I won't flip everybody off, but the middle finger is the sociocultural. And this is Bruce Alexander's work and other amazing practitioners where they went, hey, we got to pay attention to, we have been socioculturally indoctrinated to participate in continual addiction, whether through consumption. But Bruce Alexander's work went really deep with this from a historical and a lineage perspective, where he looked at a term he called psychosocial disintegration. And this idea that the West had come into Aboriginal Australian cultures, African cultures, Native American cultures, and we had taken their ways of being, ways of relating to themselves, to their communities, and we had basically ripped them and extracted them from their roots and therefore created these addictive tendencies that we see. So the sociocultural was a way to look at it. And then the ring finger is what I call the developmental. And this would be any of the theorists that would look at youth and addiction or young adult addiction. And they would say it has to do with um, a not fully formed prefrontal cortex and executive functioning and youth energy and impulsivity and risk taking, and would just look at everything through a developmental lens. And then finally, the pinky was the spiritual. And this would be work like Stanley Groff's wife, Christina Groff. She wrote an incredible book called The Thirst for Wholeness, looking at all addiction as an attempt to have union or connection with the Most High or God or the divine. Um, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to take Bateson's profound work and go, not only is it all of those, but at the same time, we're the one who made those up. When you go into the institutions and the academic colleges, you see that we separate everything. We have anthropology, we have sociology, we have psychology, we have chemistry, we have biology, and we act as if they are separate from one another. But Bateson's famous quote was, the biggest problems in the world lie in the difference between how nature works and how man thinks. Life doesn't operate where it's going, it's anthropology over here, it's psychology over here, and nor do we as this organic plant matter. You can't just study my biochemistry. Ken Wilber talked about it really well. He was like, you could take a brain and you can weigh it, you can measure it, you can look at the neurotransmitters, you can look at the functioning of the brain, and you can never know a single thought or emotion that that person ever felt. It will give you different information in different ways. So I wanted to look at the relationships in between. What is the relationship between the biological processes, the psychological narratives, the socio-cultural that we're immersed in, our development, and the spiritual, to take the exploration of addiction to a more nuanced understanding? Because I think everybody's asking, what is addiction? And that question doesn't necessarily interest me. What interests me is, what does addiction do? How does it move? How does it flux and flow? What does the energy of it do? And I also pulled in quite a bit of work from Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari, and they've written some seminal text over the years. But French postmodern philosophers, they wrote Anti-Oedipus, and then another work called Capitalism and Schizophrenia. And they look at things, they call it the rhizome, which is a botanical analogy looking at how things grow rhizomatically rather than like a tree-like structure. And the rhizome is this underground stem of roots that if you break off at one end, it forms and you can't really trace it and you can't map it, and it moves and it flows and it ebbs and it fluxes. And I think in many ways, addiction is a rhizome. And when we try and pin it down, it will kind of reveal to us its multiplicity.
Yeah, we call it the whack-a-mole.
Yeah, there you go. 100%. Just as soon as you got it, you're like, you know what? I figured out my addiction. It's this. And if I
Yeah,
can control this aspect, and you just start to see, it moves. And that's where I say, Patrick, I'm very grateful for my addiction, if we want to call it that, and more of my relationship with the addictive aspects of myself and culture as taking me to learn to understand about myself more.
yeah, yeah. You hear people say that in 12-step meetings a lot. I'm a grateful addict or alcoholic. Of course, going through it is one thing, but coming out the other end, man, yeah, that's what I mean. It's been a gift. It is so often, the spiritual finger, the pinky. Where was it? The NHS in the UK, the National Health Service, biopsychosocial model. They leave it at three. That sits nice and comfortably. You don't want to mention spiritual because that'll get people all confused. Because, they just think or they go to AA and they say they talked about God, but everybody's entitled to have their own conception. That's always what it's said, but yeah, there's this anyway, I'm glad you're looking at everything because, you see so many silos. This one says, I got the answer over here. The other one says, I got the answer over there. And the meanwhile, addicts are dying on the street. It's like you
Yeah.
have the harm reduction people arguing with the abstinence people. I mean, any model that brings everybody together at the table, I think is great. So I
Yeah.
applaud you for looking at it that way, really.
Well,
And
and Patrick, just so you know, it wasn't it all came from my own journey. It
yeah,
wasn't like I was sitting over here going, I'm gonna be the new theorist that comes up. I don't want to contribute to that. I don't want to be the new understanding of addiction. I want to break some of the old archaic ways in which we see it so that we can come together and learn more. And just another Nora Bateson's term, transcontextual, I think
mm,
is really beautiful. So this idea of like it's moving beyond the multidisciplinary, which would
mm,
say, okay, we need the biology, individuals to talk to the psychologist, to talk to the sociologist. I think we all need to begin to think more systemically and more rhizomatically and see how all of these things relate, not just stay in kind of one lens, but just start to see the ways that they interact. And one beautiful analogy that Nora Bateson uses, she talks about mental monocropping. And this is the idea that in agriculture, they monocrop. So in farming, they'll create, different agricultural landscapes that only grow one particular thing. And they don't want to cross pollinate. So they want to keep it separate. And she says what we've done in our thinking is very similar. We have mentally monocropped. We don't want to cross pollinate ideas. So we almost got to lull ourselves or wake up out of this sleep that we've been lulled into where we think the biological is separate from the psychological, is separate from the sociocultural, is separate from the divine. It ain't separate and it's never been separate. The body is the mind and the mind is the body, and it is interwoven in this tapestry that is always dancing with one another. It's doing something much different and it's not separate. It's transcontextual.
beautiful. Yeah, I know all about monocropping. I grew up in Ireland and we studied the Irish potato famine at school and realizing that they only had one type of potato growing. And when the blight hit, there was no other crop. There was no other type of potato. In Peru, they got like, I don't know how many types of potatoes, but
Yeah.
Walter Raleigh, he brought one type to Ireland. But anyway, so yeah, this is a beautiful way to look at things. And the other thing that I forgot to do was we usually start out these sessions with reading a little reflection. We call the set aside reflection. Help us set aside everything we think we know about addiction, about recovery, about others, about higher powers, and about everything else so we can have a new experience, like the beginner's mind. Just,
Mm,
what is it? He says in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are a few. Suzuki,
yes.
Roshi.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is beautiful. Hey, we could go on forever here. Thank you so much, Wes.
Oh,
Go
it's a
ahead.
pleasure.